In the warm, sunlit streets of 7th century Medina, there was a home unlike any other. It belonged to Ali ibn Abi Talib, R.A., and Fatima al-Zahra, R.A., the daughter of the Prophet Muhammad. Within this blessed household, two luminous souls were born, Hazrat Hassan and Hazrat Hussain, the beloved grandsons of the Prophet. Hazrat Hassan was born in the year 3H625 CE, followed a year later by Hazrat Hussain in 4AH626 CE. From the moment of their birth, these two children were surrounded not just by love, but by divine affection and spiritual legacy. The Prophet PBUA himself received news of their births with joy. When Hassan was born, he recited the Adhan, call to prayer, in his right ear, and the Iqama in his left, as he would do for Hussain as well, a prophetic tradition that linked the newborns to Islam's core practices from the very first breath. The bond between the Prophet Muhammad PBOA and his grandsons was extraordinary. In an era when male children were often seen only as successors or soldiers, the Prophet saw in them a deeper significance, a spiritual inheritance. He often carried them on his shoulders, let them climb on his back during prayer, and held them tenderly as he gave sermons to the people. One famous incident saw the Prophet in sujood, prostration during prayer for an unusually long time. When asked why, he replied that his grandson had climbed on his back and he did not wish to disturb him. Such was the love and patience he showed them. Another well-known hadith records the Prophet saying, "Hassan and Hussain are the leaders of the youth of paradise." This was no ordinary praise. It was a declaration of their elevated status in the eyes of Allah and a message to the Muslim community that these children were to be revered, respected, and learned from. The Prophet's home was modest, but it was filled with immense spiritual light, or nur. Fatima, known for her piety and gentleness, raised her children with simplicity and devotion. Ali, the cousin of the Prophet and the fourth Caliph of Islam, taught his sons courage, wisdom, and integrity. From this noble upbringing, Hassan became known for his calmness, generosity, and diplomacy, while Hussain developed a deep sense of justice, fearlessness, and moral clarity. What is most profound is how the Prophet used the love of his grandsons to teach the Ummah. Once, while delivering a sermon, he saw Hassan and Hussain walking toward him in their childlike innocence, stumbling as they came. He immediately stopped his sermon, descended from the pulpit, lifted them into his arms, and said, "Indeed, your wealth and children are a trial. I saw these two stumbling and I could not be patient. I cut my sermon short to pick them up." Narrated in Tirmidhi, this public display of affection was intentional. In a society where emotional expression toward children was not the norm, the Prophet broke cultural conventions. He made it clear that loving children, especially grandsons, was not just acceptable, it was sunnah. He even corrected those who found such displays strange. Once a man saw the Prophet kiss one of his grandsons, and remarked, "I have 10 children, and I've never kissed any of them." The Prophet replied, "He who does not show mercy will not be shown mercy." Bukhari and Muslim. The love between the Prophet and his grandsons was reciprocal. Hassan and Hussain would run to meet their grandfather, often clinging to his robes or sitting in his lap as he prayed or conversed. When the Prophet PBO would travel, he would often take one or both boys with him. They were not just children to him, they were his companions, his students, and his legacy. This bond wasn't just emotional, it was spiritual. The Prophet, PBO, knew the trials his grandsons would face after his death. He prepared them with knowledge, love, and strength of faith. One of the most famous moments in Islamic history is the event of the cloak. Hadith al-Qisa. The Prophet gathered Fatima, Ali, Hassan, and Hussain under his cloak and said, "These are the people of my household. O Allah, purify them completely." This act forever established their spiritual purity Ahlul Bayt and central role in Islam. Even today, Muslims across sects, Sunni and Shia alike, revere Hassan and Hussain as paragons of virtue, spiritual nobility and prophetic love. Their early lives were shaped not only by a noble lineage, but by the tender, guiding hands of the Messenger of Allah himself. In every whisper of the Adhan, in every child's smile during prayer, in every act of mercy and protection of the weak, the memory of Hassan and Hussain lives on. The love of the Prophet for them was not just familial, it was a lesson to the world that leadership, righteousness and strength begin in the lap of compassion. In the complex and often turbulent years following the Prophet Muhammad's passing, the Islamic world faced internal challenges that tested the very fabric of the Ummah. Among the towering figures who emerged during this period, Hazrat Hassan ibn Ali stood out not for seeking power, but for willingly giving it up in the name of unity and peace. Born in 625 CE 3 AH, Hazrat Hassan was the elder grandson of the Prophet Muhammad, PBUA. From his earliest days, he was trained in both spiritual and worldly affairs under the direct guidance of the Prophet, his father Ali ibn Abi Talib and his mother Fatima al-Zahra. Known for his wisdom, kindness and generosity, Hassan grew into a figure admired across the Islamic world. When his father Ali the fourth Caliph of Islam, was assassinated in 61 CE, the Muslim Ummah was in a fragile state. The long-standing tension between the provinces of Syria, led by Muawiyah ibn Abi Sufyan, and the center of the Caliphate in Kufa, had reached a boiling point. After Ali's death, the people of Kufa pledged allegiance to Hassan as the new Caliph. At just 37 years old, Hassan became the fifth leader of the Muslim Ummah. But the caliphate Hassan inherited was weakened by years of conflict and political divisions. The wounds from the Battle of Siffin between Ali and Muawiyah and the betrayal of the Khawarij were still fresh. Hassan found himself in a position where he could either continue the war against Muawiyah, risking even more bloodshed, or seek a path of reconciliation. Many of his supporters wanted revenge. They sought to restore the full authority of the caliphate. But Hassan saw deeper. He saw that another war could tear the Ummah apart completely. Hassan began negotiations with Muawiyah, seeking a peaceful settlement. He proposed a peace treaty, an unprecedented act in the history of the caliphate. His conditions were straightforward and rooted in Islamic values. Muawiyah would become the ruler, but only during his lifetime. The caliphate would not become hereditary. After Muawiyah's death, it would return to the people to choose a leader. No retaliation would be taken against the followers of Ali. Islamic justice and the Prophet's traditions, Sunnah, would be preserved. Muawiyah accepted the terms, and Hassan abdicated the caliphate in the year 61 CE, just 6 months after becoming caliph. This act shocked many of his own supporters. Some accused him of weakness or giving up the rightful leadership of the Prophet's family. But history would prove otherwise. Hassan's abdication wasn't a defeat. It was a victory for wisdom, patience, and unity. The Prophet PBO had once predicted this moment, saying, "This son of mine is a Sayyid, a leader, and perhaps Allah will bring about peace between two great groups of Muslims through him." Bukhari. That prophecy came true when Hassan, in one of the most selfless decisions in Islamic history, stepped down for the greater good. Through this, he prevented thousands of Muslims from dying in civil war. He saved the Ummah from descending into deeper division. After stepping down, Hassan moved to Medina and withdrew from politics. There he dedicated his life to teaching, prayer, and serving the people. He became known for his generosity, giving away all his wealth multiple times in charity, and his humility. Despite his noble lineage, he walked among the poor, visited the sick, and never turned away someone in need. But not everyone was happy with peace. Over time, political tensions resurfaced. Some of Hassan's own supporters saw his withdrawal as a lost opportunity to restore leadership to the Prophet's family. He faced betrayal even from within his own household. According to historical accounts, Hassan was poisoned, likely under political manipulation. He died in 600 CE 50 AH, a martyr to unity and peace. As he lay dying, his brother Hussain wept by his side. Hassan asked that he be buried near the Prophet PBU, but not at the cost of further conflict. When opposition arose, he was buried instead in Jannat al-Baqi, the famous cemetery in Medina, where he rests among the Prophet's companions and family. Hazrat Hassan's legacy is profound, but often understated. In a world that often glorifies conquest, Hassan chose reconciliation over revenge, dialogue over war, and patience over pride. His short time as caliph was less about ruling and more about healing. He showed that true leadership is not always about holding power. Sometimes it's about letting it go for a higher cause. Today, Hazrat Hassan is remembered by all Muslims, Sunni and Shia, as a symbol of wisdom, justice and mercy. He showed that sometimes the bravest act is not to fight, but to forgive. In choosing peace, he upheld the true spirit of Islam. In the golden city of Medina, Hazrat Hussain ibn Ali grew up under the loving care of the Prophet Muhammad PBUA, his grandfather. As the younger son of Ali ibn Abi Talib and Fatima Zahra Hussain was not only born into the Prophet's household, but was also shaped by it. The Prophet would hold him close during prayers, let him ride on his shoulders, and often declare in front of the people, "Hussain is from me and I am from Hussain." These weren't just expressions of affection, they reflected a divine bond and a profound spiritual destiny. Years passed, and after the Prophet's passing, the Muslim world expanded rapidly, but also became politically divided. When Muawiyah assumed leadership after a peace treaty with Hussein's elder brother, Hassan, many hoped the Ummah would regain stability. However, after Muawiyah's death, his son Yazid took power in violation of that treaty. Yazid's rule marked a clear departure from Islamic values. His disregard for justice, ethics, and the teachings of the Prophet deeply troubled the righteous. When Yazid demanded allegiance from Hussain, the grandson of the Prophet refused. Pledging loyalty to someone who openly violated the core teachings of Islam would have legitimized tyranny. Hussein's refusal was not about ambition, it was a defense of truth. Knowing that remaining in Medina would invite danger and bloodshed, Hussain chose to leave the city with his family and companions. As he traveled, letters poured in from Kufa, a city in Iraq, where the people promised him support and invited him to lead them against Yazid's rule. Though cautious, Hussain believed it was his responsibility to answer the call for leadership, not for power, but to revive the prophetic values that were fading under Yazid's reign. On his journey toward Kufa, Hussain and his small caravan, about 72 individuals including women and children, were intercepted by Yazid's army. They were forced to camp on the barren plains of Karbala. The soldiers blocked access to the nearby Euphrates River, cutting off their water supply. This cruelty extended even to infants, including Hussein's 6-month-old son, Ali Asghar. For days, the family suffered in the scorching desert without water. Hussain attempted to negotiate peace, offering to return to Medina or live quietly elsewhere, but Yazid's demand remained firm: pledge allegiance or be destroyed. Then came the 10th of Muharram, the day known as Ashura. The morning sun rose over Karbala to witness a tragedy that would echo through history. Hussain stood knowing death awaited him and his loved ones. One by one, his companions and family members were slain. His teenage son, Ali Akbar, was cut down in the battlefield. His brother Abbas, the flag-bearer, was martyred while trying to fetch water for the children. Even the infant Ali Asghar was killed in Hussein's arms by a heartless arrow. Through it all, Hussain remained steadfast. a symbol of unshakable faith and courage. At last, alone and gravely wounded, Hussain stood surrounded by thousands. Weakened, he continued to pray and fight, not with rage but with dignity. As he fell, he whispered final prayers, submitting fully to the will of Allah. His head was severed, and his body trampled by horses, but the soul of his message could not be silenced. Hussein's martyrdom was not the end. It was a beginning. The women and children were taken captive, including his sister Zainab, who would carry forward the message of Karbala. Standing in the court of Yazid, she spoke fearlessly, exposing his tyranny and defending the legacy of her brother. Her powerful voice ensured that the truth of Karbala reached every corner of the Muslim world. Karbala was never a mere battlefield. It became a moral dividing line. On one side stood power, force, and worldly ambition. On the other stood truth, sacrifice, and unwavering faith. Hussein's stand showed that even when outnumbered and seemingly defeated, the power of righteousness is eternal. His martyrdom taught the world that standing up for truth may cost everything. But it grants immortality in the hearts of those who value justice. Muslims across generations and traditions continue to remember and honor Hussain. Every year during Muharram, his story is retold, not just to mourn a loss, but to revive a spirit. His life is not just a chapter in Islamic history. It is a lasting call to conscience. The tragedy of Karbala reminds the world that silence in the face of injustice is complicity, and that sometimes the smallest group, armed with truth, can shake the foundations of falsehood. Hazrat Hussein's sacrifice at Karbala wasn't a political move, it was an act of spiritual leadership, a defense of the Prophet's message, and a defining moment for all who believe in dignity, courage, and moral clarity. As the Prophet had foretold, Hussain became a lantern of guidance and an ark of salvation. His blood nourished the roots of justice in Islam, and his legacy continues to light the path for those who refuse to surrender to oppression, no matter the cost. The desert of Karbala was silent before the storm. The sands, heated by the sun of early Muharram, bore witness to one of the most heart-wrenching and spiritually profound events in Islamic history. The battle in which Hazrat Hussain ibn Ali R.A., the beloved grandson of the Prophet Muhammad PB, was martyred along with his family and companions. It was not just a clash between two sides, it was a confrontation between truth and tyranny, between faith and political ambition. The blood that was shed on that soil would not be forgotten, for it carried a message that would echo through centuries. The events that led to Karbala had been building since the death of Muawiyah, the first Umayyad Caliph. His son Yazid inherited the caliphate and quickly demanded allegiance from the prominent figures of the Muslim world, including Hussain. But Hussain refused. For him, allegiance was not a formality, it was a matter of conscience. Yazid, notorious for his immoral behavior, stood in stark opposition to the values the Prophet had established. Hussain could not and would not endorse his rule. His refusal marked the beginning of a journey that would lead to sacrifice unlike any other. When the people of Kufa in Iraq invited Hussain to lead them against Yazid and restore justice, he responded to their call. He left Medina with his family, including women and children, accompanied by a small group of loyal companions. Along the way, however, the political tides turned. Yazid's forces cracked down on Kufan's supporters, and the promises of military support evaporated. Despite this, Hussain continued forward, not for power, but for principle. He believed it was his duty to awaken the conscience of the Muslim Ummah. By the time Hussain and his caravan reached the plains of Karbala in early Muharram 61 AH, October 680 CE, they were intercepted by a massive army sent by Yazid. The small group of less than 100 people was now surrounded by thousands of soldiers. The opposing commander, Umar ibn Sayyad, was under strict orders to force Hussain to surrender or kill him. Water from the nearby Euphrates River was blocked. For days the family of the Prophet suffered under the searing heat of the desert without a drop to drink. The children cried in thirst, the old grew weak. And yet Hussain stood firm, offering multiple peaceful alternatives. All were rejected. On the 10th day of Muharram, known as Ashura, the battle commenced. It was a day soaked in sorrow, bravery, and spiritual glory. Hussein's companions, knowing their fate, went to the battlefield one by one. Each fought with unmatched courage and faith. They were not professional soldiers. They were scholars, worshippers, family men. Yet their hearts were as strong as steel when facing injustice. One after another, they were martyred, each death striking another blow to Hussein's heart. Among them were Hussein's beloved ones, his son Ali Akbar, barely a youth, who resembled the Prophet in appearance and character. When he fell in battle, Hussain wept over his body and said, "O Allah, bear witness to the killing of a youth who resembled your Prophet in looks, character, and speech." His half-brother Abbas, the standard-bearer, was killed while trying to bring water for the children. His arms were severed, and yet he pressed on until he fell, dying with the water jug still clutched in his hands. Even the infant Ali Asghar, only 6 months old, was not spared. Hussain held the baby in his arms and begged for water from the enemy. In response, an archer fired an arrow that pierced the child's throat. Hussain was the last to stand. Tired, wounded and grieving, he performed his final prayers amid the chaos. His armor was torn, his body pierced by arrows, his heart heavy with the pain of watching his loved ones fall. Still, he did not submit. He charged into the enemy ranks, defending his principles until his strength gave out. As he fell, they surrounded him, struck him down, and severed his head from his body. After the battle, the women and children, including Zainab bint Ali and Imam Zain al-Abidin, the only surviving male from Hussein's line, were taken as prisoners. The tents were burned. The heads of the martyrs were placed on spears and paraded through the streets toward Yazid's court. Yet even in chains, Zainab stood tall. Her speech in the court of Yazid condemned his tyranny and revived the truth of what had happened in Karbala. She transformed the tragedy into a movement. The words of those who survived ensured that Karbala would never be forgotten. Karbala was not a battle won by numbers nor by strategy or force. It was won by the purity of purpose. It was a sacrifice to protect the soul of Islam from being hollowed out by corruption. It was a lesson to humanity that standing against injustice is not only a duty, it is worship. Hussain and his followers died, but they awakened generations with their blood. They were few, but they shook empires. They were surrounded, but they stood free. In dying, they lived forever. To this day, millions across the world commemorate the tragedy of Karbala. It is not simply a story of the past, it is a living truth. Every oppressed soul finds solace in Hussain. Every cry for justice echoes his name. His sacrifice was not just for his time, it was for all time. And on the sands of Karbala, a timeless message was written. Truth, even when alone, can never be defeated. The story of Hazrat Hassan and Hussain did not end with their deaths. It truly began there. In the decades and centuries that followed, their choices, sacrifices, and unwavering faith carved a permanent space in the heart of Islamic history. They were not only the grandsons of the Prophet Muhammad, PBO, but the living embodiment of his message: mercy, justice, and truth. The legacy they left behind continues to shape the conscience of the Muslim world and serves as a timeless reminder that faith is not merely belief, it is the courage to act on it, even when the world stands against you. Hazrat Hassan, after the passing of his father Ali, stood at a crossroads. As the rightful leader of the Muslim Ummah, he had every justification to assert his claim. Yet when he saw the community teetering on the edge of civil war, with the pain of previous battles still fresh. He made a decision few could. He chose peace over pride, unity over division, in a society where power was often pursued at all costs. Hassan relinquished the caliphate, not out of weakness, but out of spiritual insight. He foresaw the greater good in preventing further bloodshed. His act was not political surrender. It was a profound lesson in leadership, proving that real strength lies in restraint and responsibility. He withdrew from the political scene, lived a life of humility, and focused on teaching, charity, and service. He gave away his wealth multiple times, not for recognition, but out of love for Allah and His creation. He forgave those who betrayed him and never sought vengeance. Though many misunderstood his decision, time has shown it to be one of the most selfless and strategic moves in early Islamic history. It prevented a war and preserved the Ummah from fragmenting beyond repair. That act of sacrifice cemented his place, not just as a caliph, but as a peacemaker of prophetic stature. Hazrat Hussain, on the other hand, bore a different burden. Where Hassan's role was to mend division, Hussein's was to confront tyranny. When Yazid's rule pushed Islamic values to the brink, Hussain stood as a wall that refused to collapse. He did not rise for personal power or political revenge. His goal was to wake the Muslim conscience from a dangerous slumber. His martyrdom at Karbala wasn't an isolated event. It was a statement, a spiritual uprising. Though outnumbered and abandoned by the same people who invited him, he carried on, not for victory in this world, but for salvation in the next. The Battle of Karbala left Hussain physically defeated, but morally triumphant. It wasn't just his sword that inspired the world, it was his patience, his trust in God, and his refusal to compromise on truth. With his final breath, he taught humanity that some principles are worth more than life itself. He showed that even if you stand alone, if you stand for truth, you have already won. Together, Hassan and Hussain created a model of leadership rarely seen in human history. One chose to surrender the crown for peace, the other chose death over silence. One prevented war with wisdom, the other challenged injustice with blood. These were not just reactions to their circumstances, they were reflections of their upbringing, their knowledge of the Prophet's teachings, and their deep understanding of divine purpose. Their sacrifices also gave rise to another powerful legacy, the role of women in preserving and carrying forward the truth. After the martyrdom of Hussain, it was his sister, Zainab, who became the voice of Karbala. Her defiance in the court of Yazid echoed the courage of her brother. She turned humiliation into dignity, captivity into resistance. Her words shook palaces and pierced the veil of lies spun by the oppressors. Without her, the world might never have known the full truth of what occurred on those scorching plains. The legacy of Hassan and Hussain lives in every heart that refuses to accept falsehood. Their names are invoked wherever the oppressed cry for justice. Their stories are taught to children not as history, but as living guidance. The values they lived and died for, truth, patience, sacrifice, and compassion, are eternal. In every era, from tyrants in ancient palaces to modern-day oppression, their legacy whispers a powerful reminder: do not compromise your faith, even if it costs you everything. And so the legacy of faith and sacrifice is not just about two noble men, it is about a standard they set for all believers. It is a mirror held up to every generation, asking, what do you stand for? Would you protect truth over comfort? Would you choose justice over power? Would you speak out even when silence is safer? This is why their remembrance is not merely emotional, it is transformative. Every year, millions remember Ashura, not just in mourning, but in commitment. Commitment to truth, to courage, to resisting injustice in all forms, be it in society, in politics, or in one's own heart. Hazrat Hassan, and Hussain left the world with more than memories. They left it with a mission to uphold the light of Islam, no matter the cost, a mission to never let fear silence the truth. And as long as hearts beat with faith, their legacy will never die.